everybody. It's your friendly neighborhood, Jerry Rasco, here with you again for another amazing Spider-Man art retrospective video. I want to start by just thanking everybody again for your support with these videos. All your views mean a great deal, and I appreciate everybody who checks these out and anybody who subscribes here to my YouTube channel. If you're finding this video but you haven't seen the earlier ones, there is a playlist here on my channel that will take you back all the way to the very beginning of Spider-Man's origins in Amazing Fantasy number 15, and all the way to here, where today we are going to be looking at the Amazing Spider-Man number 8. It's kind of it's an interesting and different kind of issue than we've really seen before. I guess without further ado, let's jump into it, take a look, and we'll go through it, and we'll see y'all share my thoughts, and hopefully we'll hear from you and your thoughts too. So here we go. So this is the Amazing Spider-Man number 8, a special tribute to teenagers issue, which seems a little unique. Okay, we've got the Human Torch, so we've seen Spider-Man interact with Marvel's other, at the time, preeminent superhero book, the Fantastic Four. So we've got some of that, as well as obviously some action and some other stuff. The cover is a little strange in that it's a little montagey, but I think that's So I don't know. We'll get into it and we'll see. And again, I'm always curious to hear anybody's thoughts on what you think, might have been the reasoning behind. Obviously, a lot of that is lost to time. For anybody who's not aware, this comic was written by the very famous, very beloved Stan Lee, who of course has passed on, and then Steve Ditko is the artist, and who is no longer with us either. So, when we talk about, like, why did they do this? Why did they do that? Why did they make these choices? Why this kind of cover? Why not, something a little different? It's, it's lost. It's just speculation. It's lost to history. But I guess, it's interesting. There's a lot of shading on this big Spidey figure here. I guess the idea would be that the torch would be a very bright source of light. I don't necessarily see that a ton in the comics, but here in the cover they're kind of going with that way, I guess. Anyway, like I said, the cover is a little strange to me, but very bright, very eye-catching. Certainly something that on the newsstands, in the spinner rack at a convenience store or something like that, boy, you would notice it right away. So that it's done its job there for sure. So let's go ahead and jump in and start looking at this. So we do have the credits here, as I mentioned, written by Stan Lee, illustrated by Steve Ditko, and lettered by Art Simek. I believe that's how it's pronounced. And if you have watched my earlier videos, this is a physically scanned copy of the original comic. So obviously there's aging in regards to the yellowing of the paper, tears, clips, little chips, things like that. But the idea is that this is original. This is not a reprint. Nobody went in and recolored this issue. This is what it looks like if you had it in your hands today, which I really enjoy. So this first splash page, this is very common, as we've seen throughout the series so far. They open with a splash page. It typically shows a scene from the comic. Spidey jumping onto this robot who is called the Living Brain, and before you can, I guess, smash these kids in the foreground. It seems to be part of the time. I don't know if it's like comes from the style of movie posters or magazine printing, something, but there's so much copy on this page when what you're trying to do is help capture the reader that picks it up off the stand and says, okay, the cover caught my eye. What is this really about? They maybe open, they see that splash page. You want to hook them to where they have to buy this. They have to plunk their money down and bring this home to read the rest of the story. I don't know if this does it, or again, maybe as a sign of the times, maybe all that writing really would. I mean, so they're telling you about it's the living brain. Peter Parker's going to fight Flash Thompson. Spider-Man's going to fight the robot. There's all this stuff. For me, as an artist and somebody that appreciates that aspect of the comic book as much as I appreciate the writing, I think I would have liked to have, again, seen a larger image. Maybe make Spidey a little bigger. You could make the kids much bigger in the foreground and really make this robot large and more menacing above them. So maybe from a low, instead of looking, so we're looking down slightly, right? Which is why we can see the top of the heads. You can see the floor moves away from us in perspective. Maybe instead of coming from the top down, maybe we come from down low up, which makes the robot look even more large and menacing, and Spidey jumping from behind to try to stop it. There's ways, other ways to do it. I think I talked about it a lot in my last episode, let's talk about the mechanics or the process of making a comic book for anybody who doesn't know. So, I noted here, this is illustrated by Steve Ditko. Again, my assumption is that means he is doing all of the artwork minus the coloring piece of it. So that means he's drawing it in pencil. He's coming in with probably brushes to do all the ink lines with thin brushes, and then it goes to a colorist who's going to do all the coloring process, and then to the letterer, or maybe vice versa, maybe the letterer then the colorist, and then they add their element, and then the whole thing is put together into plates and files that can be printed depending on your era. Today we do it all digitally. Back then they had physical plates that ink would go through, so you had a plate for each color, plates that would allow colors to mix. Much more obviously time-consuming mechanism, but you have a comic that has somewhere in between 22 to 24, 26 pages of copy of illustration of story in it. And then you have to get that done in time to print it and have it ready, for the next month. So it can be very time consuming to make a comic book. Even if you draw one page a day, just drawing it could take you close to a month. So obviously they were working ahead, meaning, it wasn't, I have to get this done right now because it's due next month. You had several issues done, but you're still always basically under a deadline, is what I'm getting at. So sometimes things get done and it's your first pass, it's your first idea. I'm sure if Steve was to go through here and decide to do that, to be like, hey, maybe this isn't working for me. I want to go ahead and let me try another angle. He just didn't have time for it. So you got to go with your first instinct sometimes. So anyway, here we go. The figure of Spidey leaping is cool. The kids, I found the kids' hair to be interesting, of all things. I guess, again, as an artist, I find different things to focus on. And so I don't know what it was, but there's something about this hair here, maybe this one here a little bit, that I found really interesting. The line work, I guess, it feels full. It doesn't feel just like something like lines on a head. It felt like it was a more three-dimensional. It felt like it had volume to it, which I thought was kind of neat. So I don't know, it's cool, and he did a great job with it, but there's something about that to me just kind of stuck out, of all things. So we go to the next page, and again, from a story and art perspective, there's a lot happening here. They're trying to explain what's going on to set up several stories. You have the story of the robot. You have the story of Flash Thompson, Peter Parker's nemesis as his school bully. They come to face to face. Finally, they're going to come to blows technically. So you have a lot happening here. This does mark the end of Peter Parker's glasses. So I don't know if anybody has noticed in these early issues that Peter Parker, part of him being smart, studious, they call him bookworm all the time, things like that, he wore glasses. Here, Flash, knocks him off, breaks his glasses, and then from that moment forward, he never wears glasses again. Now, is that a story element to say, did somebody point out, like, how can Spider-Man swing around in his mask and fight villains if he can't see anything because he needs glasses? Or was it maybe, did we want to start making Peter feel a little more heroic in his own persona, not just as Spider-Man, because he's starting to, gain some confidence as he gets older and experienced? Maybe that was it. Maybe Steve Ditko was tired of drawing the glasses and wanted to just draw the face. I don't know. But at this point, from this point forward, that's the end. We don't see it anymore on Peter. I really like this body language here. There's ways it could have been done where, somebody could have turned Flash into a profile shot where it just would have been from the side and he pushes Peter. But the turn of the head, the little scowl, the body language of Peter's head and whole body turning, like, it's really, really good body language. That is some really good storytelling that tells you this isn't just a little, like, he's not putting his hand on his head and giving him a little pet. Like, he's really pushing him and knocking those glasses off. So that's some really nice body language there. Let's see. We go down to the next page here, and I've talked a lot about this in other videos, which, if you're familiar, I'll keep referencing that. And again, why I highly recommend that you do check out the playlist if you have time. Early on in the early issues of Spider-Man, we saw the grid, the panels, all the panels lined up. They were the same size, same shape, and you would have maybe 6 panels. So here you have, panel 1, panel 2 are the same size, split evenly. Then panel 3 and 4 would be exactly the same. This space between the panels is referred to as a gutter. That gutter would have gone all the way down the center, and you would have had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that was very common. That happened a lot. In the last couple issues that we've seen, we've started to see this, what I call offset panels, meaning that they don't line up perfectly into that pure grid format unless there's a reason for it. So this is really nice. We're back to the offset grid, which I enjoy. It gives more variety to the art, more variety to what's happening in the imagery and the storytelling, and I think that makes for a better reading experience. So on this page here, I really like the faces of the thugs. I call them thugs. I don't know what else to call them. I really enjoy the idea that they look like, when I saw this, and we'll zoom in on their faces, I feel like I looked at this and I was like, these look like people. Like, they look like actors maybe that I've seen in movies somewhere. I can't place them exactly. If you see this, if you recognize maybe these are modeled after some actors, put it in the comments. Let me know. It's right there on the tip of my tongue. Like, I know I've seen these faces somewhere. But I really like that. That's a great idea. If you're looking to fill in your story with, again, nameless thugs, nobody's ever gonna remember who these guys are. Students in the background. Base them off of real people, people from a movie, people from an advertisement, TV, whatever it is. It makes them real. Like, these guys feel like real, and immediately from their look, that they're no good. These aren't a couple of really nice guys who just all of a sudden see an opportunity and go, maybe we'll steal this fancy new robot. Like, it is so clear that these are some bad, bad people. And I love it. The hand gesture's great. I like the knuckles. And you see the start of like the tendons going down those knuckles. Small details. The little bit of chest hair showing up on the collar. Great details that get missed so much, not only in older comics, but even in modern comics today. Steve Ditko is amazing when it comes to unique, original faces and characters. So, let's see. We're going to keep moving on to the next page. So, just from a story perspective, this idea is that this scientist has built this fancy robot that he calls the living brain. It's the smartest computer in the world. It can figure out everything. And of course, all the kids are infatuated with Spider-Man. So why don't we ask the robot to tell us who Spider-Man is? That's a great idea. So they kind of throw out what they know about him, his height, how much they think he weighs, where he's been seen, and they put the information in, and Peter is like, uh-oh, this is it, right? This computer's going to give it away. And he has this sort of, really like this panel a lot. I thought it was great. This sort of montage imagination of all the people that it would, what would happen if they found out that he's Spider-Man. So, Aunt May, Jonah Jameson, the Vulture, what would happen? So there's this light from the robot, and it's lighting up Peter's face, but the lighting is terrific, the way he does it with the line work. So one, you have the red color. That shows that there's an unusual amount of light, right? It's coloring his skin. But these rendered hatch marks, it's not cross-hatching, so let me talk about that terminology. So in comics, especially back here in this era, you didn't have the ability the way you do today with computer colors and Photoshop and things like that to do what is referred to as a gradient, meaning I can't take a color, say like the green of this robot, start with a lighter tone of that green and a darker tone of that green, and have the computer say, I want to go from the top of the shoulder where the light's hitting it, I want it to be light, and then middle, and then dark on the other side. We do that in today's Photoshop and today's coloring of comics, and it can be printed that way. But back here, the way you made this green was you had to mix a certain amount of blue and a certain amount of yellow ink to make this color of green, and they didn't have the ability to have that sort of granular light, dark tones and all the levels in between. So how would you do that? So the way you do it, like here on the robot, here on Peter's face, I want it to be lighter in one area, going to darker where the shadow is. So you would use the black lines to illustrate the transition from a lighter color to essentially a darker color. This is called hatching. It's also referred to as rendering. It's a way to add volume. It's a way to add lighting, etc., to your two-dimensional drawing. So again, it's one of the terms is called hatching. You make little hatch marks with whether it's your brush or your pen or whatever you're using. And you see that is primarily what Steve Ditko uses here in his artwork. So we see it here on the robot. These are you could call them sometimes called feathering lines because they start thick and go to a thin point, meaning again helping to transition the eye to show different shades when you only have one color, right? All the lines here on Peter's face kind of go in one direction from the dark shadow to the light source, where they get thinner as they go closer to the light. You see it here as he's trying to show shadows of the muscles of his pecs, of his chest muscles. So we have hatching or feathering or rendering, whatever you want to call it, all means the same thing. Later, we'll see other artists that will come in, and you actually see it. So this is an example here, down here in this corner. It's not meant for, I don't think it's meant to be shadowing. I think it's meant to be the texture of the girl's skirt, like it's supposed to be a plaid or a tweed material. But that is what's called cross hatching. Same thing here, actually, on the other page of the vest that this guy is wearing. So this is supposed to be a texture or a pattern. But what people did, the point is later what would happen is artists would take something like this robot maybe, and you would feather the lines one way, from light to dark, to show the shadow. Then you would come back in the opposite direction and add feathering or hatching in the other way. That is called cross hatching. And that adds an extra element. The closer together your lines are, the darker the color in between will show. The further apart they are, the lighter it is. So hatching and cross hatching are two terms. Sometimes they do get mixed up. I see that a lot in today where people talk about the cross hatching and you're like, there's no cross. It's just the hatching, or rendering or feathering or whatever you want to call it. So, but the point is, they did it here as a great example to show a very strong light source is hitting this side of Peter's face, and it's creating this shadow, but it's not solid black until you get like to the nose, under his chin. So the rest of it, how do you show an in-between phase of shadow? You do it with the hatching. So we'll come back out. What do we have here? Okay, so again, some more story, and as I mentioned, there is times for the grid. So the grid, these 6 panels are a grid, right? You can see the gutters, split them evenly. Every panel is exactly the same size, and the reason you use this is for pacing. When a grid, so for example, up above, all the kids are talking about what information would you put in a computer for a computer to identify who Spider-Man is. Now we have, in the next panel, there's some time between it, and then now we come to Peter, and he's thinking about what's going to happen. So some time is passing a little bit. It's not quite as fast of a movement. So these panels are offset down below. Here, he receives the answer, which is in code, and then the thugs are talking about how they're going to steal this thing, and then immediately, in a second later, Flash tries to grab the code from Peter because he wants to be the one to figure it out. Peter fends him off. They're going to start to fight. The teacher is like, hey, enough's enough. Listen, if you guys want to, you need to get this out of your system, you guys should go to the gym and just deal with it once and for all. And they go, fine. Now, after classes, we have time has passed, and now they're going to box, which is crazy to think of a teacher telling 2 high school students, why don't you go physically fight in the gym with boxing gloves. Okay. So you notice, again, these are offset panels. If it had been the same grid and that same size panel right below it, you would think it was a second later, and you're like, oh my God, did Peter just rip his clothes off in the middle of class like they're ready to go? No, it says after class, the panel size is different, and it helps us to explain that these things are all happening within seconds of each other, and now time has passed to the next scene, if you will. Even though it's on the same page, it's really the next scene. So here we go. And they're going to box. And this is great. Flash's face in here of a guy getting punched by Spider-Man. What terrific. The eyes, the way the face, the shape of the brows go up, and the wrinkles, the mouth, the way it's twisted, and the neck twisting, great here. The line of that tendon or muscle down the neck as it gets pushed back real fast. Terrific cartooning. And you could really see this as like a cartoon. When I say cartoon, I mean like a Saturday morning cartoon kind of image, a Wile E. Coyote kind of thing. But it tells us everything we need to know. It doesn't have to be photorealistic. In fact, it's probably better because this is a silly thing that's happening. And man, it really sells the idea that he has just been walloped and knocked for a loop. So that's great. I really enjoy the face there and that cartooning. So Steve Ditko, in his own way, could be very serious in terms of the art. Things like when Spider-Man's fighting, villains and stuff. It's still his own style, but he follows the rules of perspective, and he draws backgrounds, and tries to give us an element of realism to it. But then sometimes he goes to these moments of cartoony, which is terrific and is a really nice addition. Peter's face here is great as well. Really good expression. You feel the concern on his face, how big his eyes have gotten. Normally, Steve Ditko draws eyes a little bit smaller. The eyes have gotten really big. Again, the mouth, exactly how he feels about what just happened, and he realizes he's got to be so careful, because otherwise somebody could get killed. So it's amazing. So great facial expressions on this page. And again, we've moved back to that grid. So once the fight starts, right? So there's a little bit of time that goes between. They're both standing on the outside, getting their gloves ready, thinking about what's going to happen here. Then they're in the ring, and now we're into that grid for the pacing, because this is all happening quickly. It's a boxing match. We cut over to the guys trying to steal the robot. Same thing. The grid is happening because the pacing is quick. They're trying to grab it. They get interrupted. They go to punch the guy. They bump the robot. The robot comes to life and starts going crazy. So, again, fast pace, moving. We cut back and forth. We're back here to the fight. And again, more grid pacing to create that sense of rhythm and action. Things are happening fast. The fight's going on. Great here. Love the weight. Peter, you can feel how he's sliding backwards like that away from that punch. So good. So one of the things you can do, and I learned this watching an artist, not podcast, but he would do drawing streams and stuff. And one of the things he said is one of the best ways to create action and motion in a character. These are all obviously static images. The further away you put the head and the pelvis of a figure. So normally we're in a straight line. Our head, our spine, and our waist, right, are in a straight line. The more you move the head and waist apart from each other, the more action and motion and energy your figure has. And here, that's great, right? We see this really nice movement, and you feel like Peter has slid out of the way of this punch. It's very good. He knocks out Flash almost by accident. He just kind of taps him, but he's super strong, so that's what happens. And then I noted I really like this stairwell. Again, I think I mentioned in it earlier. There's the episode where we look at the issue with the Sandman is also located in the school, and so Spidey has to go up and down some staircases and stuff. And stairs are notoriously difficult to draw unless you do a grid where you draw out the perspective grid. So you're essentially going to draw a straight grid, and then you're going to find where your vanishing point is. So where everything, if you're looking off into the distance, where would everything go until you couldn't see it anymore? It vanishes to a little point, and you're going to draw all that out, so that way when you build your staircase, it's in correct perspective. But you really feel the depth of this panel, like this being very close and very large, and then the angle down. You feel like you could go down, turn, and go down again. The line work all points our eyes in those directions. Very, very nice stair perspective, which can be hard. And then a great figure of Spidey on it. Just his fingertips and his toe tips there are touching. He's really moving quick. That's a nice action pose of him running. And interesting that he would choose, instead of going up the stairs, he goes up that handrail. That's a neat little touch again of a character who probably doesn't think about it, but he doesn't need to move the way a regular person moves because any surface is an available surface for him. He doesn't have to go up the stairs. He could go straight up the wall or ceiling or wherever he needs to go. So great pose, great perspective. I really, really love that panel. That's terrific. Oh, this is very nice as well. I would have liked to seen maybe Spidey be a little bit bigger, but the idea of framing through the character's legs, we've seen that a few times. It's nice. It's a nice mechanism to use, but again, you would still recognize it's Spidey even if he was bigger and part of him was cut off the panel, because you'd recognize the feet, the webbed feet, the boots, and the blue. So that's my own personal preference. I think I would have done that, and then had all the action in between. Then I said 11, page 11, 9 panels too small. Oh, yeah. So, again, we're back to a fast pace. We're back to the grid motion and the grid composition of the page to get things knowing that, hey, this fight's happening. So on this page, there are 9 panels. That's a lot. That is really pushing kind of, the density of your page. Because again, I've said this before, a comic book page, at least today's modern comic book pages, are drawn on 10.5 by 15 image board. So with only 10 inches across and 15 inches down, you could make each of these slightly less than 5 inches tall, because you have to allow for space in between the gutters. And then likewise again across, so you're taking 10, dividing it into thirds plus the gutter, so maybe 3 inches at best. So a 3 by 5. I mean, that's very, very small image. And so all the figures here are very small. And when the figures are very small, it really takes away from the sense of action, the sense of danger. These things are itty bitty. It doesn't, psychologically as a reader, it doesn't give us a sense that this thing is truly dangerous. It looks like a little toy. So I'm not a big fan of it. I don't like the 9-panel grid. I never have. I understand the use of it, especially if you have, a lot of dialogue. But I've talked about this before. The Marvel method, the way these comic books are made, is that the story, the plot or the through line, the concept of the story was designed first. That was planned out first. Then the artist would come in and draw the action of that plot. And then that goes back to Stan Lee, who then writes all the dialogue. So Steve Ditko drew this before there was any dialogue. So it's not like he made so many panels to fit in all the words and all the stuff. Stan had to come up with all these things that Peter's thinking about or Spidey's thinking about to fill in all these panels. So why nine panel grid? I don't know. Maybe, again, comic books are time consuming. I had some questions on the previous issue about inkers, and maybe was Steve Ditko running late and had guest inkers or assistants helping? Possibly, because the inking looked a lot different. And you know what? Maybe this kind of a page right here would be really fast to draw. Right? You line out that box. You've got 1, 2 lines for the sort of the molding along the bottom of the wall. 3, 4. You color this black. There's your wall. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines is the floor. And now a little figure that's mostly blacked out. Just some shapes for Spidey ahead. You could probably draw that in 15 minutes. And that part of that 15 minutes is you taking a minute to find your ruler. I mean, it's fast. So maybe that's it. Maybe it's a method of economy. Again, Nobody will ever know. Now, within that 9-panel grid, I love this pose. This one where it's closer a little bit. He's running away from this robot that's come after him because it's dangerous, is fantastic. That pose is great. Running a running pose towards the viewer is hard to do. The body is leaned forward, so you have, like the head is covering the neck, the shoulders arch slightly behind your head. You have to shorten the torso because, again, it's leaning forward, but you also have to show it. How do the hips turn? Your hips pivot, and then one leg is coming at you, the other leg going away. So you have a lot of foreshortening concerns you have to work with. Again, for anybody who isn't familiar with the term, foreshortening is when you take something. A great example is a hand. So if I have my hand like this, you see everything. You see the palm, you see my thumb, my fingers. This is normal. If I point it towards the camera, the more I point towards the camera, the shorter and shorter it gets, to the point where my fingers become little dots that are in front of the rest of the hand, which is in front of the rest of my arm, and it's coming towards you. This is a trick that we use in two-dimensional art to show that something is coming at you, is to basically draw it blocking itself. That is called foreshortening. And foreshortening can be hard to draw, especially in a total figure like this when they're running. So that's a great challenge, but it makes a great figure when you pull it off well, and this panel's excellent. Let's see here. 12, 5 and 6, great use of panel shape. Okay. Oh, yeah. So this is something, again, a little different, right? So we've seen the grid, and they're continuing to fight and run and move and bounce and jump, and so that rhythm is there. Very nice. And then Spidey gets here with the kids, and they're stuck, and he just uses his spider strength to break through the lock on this door. I love this shape. So again, normally we would have probably seen this panel gutter come down, and these two horizontal panels would be shown as vertical, and it would just be part of the 9-panel grid. By changing this, it pauses the action, which is really important. He's running from the robot. He finds the kids. Great use of, again, horizontal to emphasize the horizontal nature. He's shooting his hand out. The door is going to swing open. Everything is happening horizontal. So you use a horizontal panel. Terrific idea. Now you turn, and the robot's gone. So now the action has paused for a moment. So we've got different shaped panels to help us understand that. And then putting his arms out, right? He could have gone, where is it? And that would have been a vertical body language motion. Instead, he's gone horizontal with the arms, and which works with that panel shape. This is an amazing, great use of the page to break up the action, break up the rhythm, and to use your shape with your storytelling, your panel shape. Terrific. And we go back to, again, now the robot finds him again, and now we move back to that regular panels and pacing again. So again, things are moving. The robot, it's again very cartoony, almost Looney Tunes, right? The robot busts through the door, knocks him down, runs him over. He goes to get up. The two robbers that are trying to steal the thing run him over, push him down again. He's like, throws the door off and keeps going. So this is interesting, and I don't know if we've seen this before exactly. And that is in this panel here, which would be number 5 and number 6, we see white ink on over black ink, and I'll zoom in and we'll talk about that and where I don't think we've seen it before. So you notice the robot in his sort of dome head has these little sparky reflections and stuff. It's possible that they were using white ink over black ink. More likely, it's possibly black feathering into a spot to to leave the white. That's certainly what's done up here where it's green. You color in the black, and then they're doing lines up to the open area. So I don't know if that's the same thing here or not. But over here, definitely, this is a different technique. You can see the little white dots. You couldn't do that by using black and leaving little dots. That would be incredibly difficult. Same thing here. You've got these little areas here. So there's two options of what's happening with these sort of shines behind this black backdrop. Again, it's either a white ink or white paint maybe over the top. That would be the easiest way to do it. The other technique that some people used is you would color that black. So you have black ink over white paper, and they would actually use knives or razor blades to shave away that very top layer of paper. So the paper that comic books are drawn on is called Bristol board. That's what most, I believe, artists use. I know that's what we use today. That's what I use. I think that's still what they were using. And Bristol board is a much thicker, harder paper, and there's multiple layers, right, to give it that thickness. And sometimes people actually refer to the paper that comics are drawn on as boards, because it's that kind of it's different than just regular paper. So you could actually take that razor blade and shave off that top layer in parts, and expose white paper underneath. Now, it's risky because you really run the chance of ripping too much or, stuff like that. But it's possible they could have done something like that, where it was, and that could give you that little sort of dot or jagged edge. That could also be the printing. But my guess is probably a white paint. That would be the most easy and most common way to do it for something like that. But that's a technique that I don't recall seeing in any of these earlier issues. So like this thing over here, this shine over here, and then this one really stood out to me as, oh wow, they're using some sort of white media on a black background. That's a new technique, which is pretty cool. Okay, so let's keep going here. We've got again, we're still into the grid pattern. We're still into that fight, so the rhythm is fast. This is really nice. Again, body language pose where he's getting grabbed and his arm is being pulled aside. Where, so we know that Spidey is really strong, right? He flicked his wrist and knocked Flash Thompson out. But this robot can grab and pull him, pull his arm, not out, but pull it aside, like he's a doll. So this thing has to be very powerful. And that's a great way of showing it with the body language, this arm being pulled out, whereas this one's kept in close. That's a real nice pose there. Nice kind of mid shot is what we would call that. And then we've got Spidey is, still fighting, still trying to get away. The robot's trying to get him. So good action. Nothing crazy going on here to talk about per se from an art perspective. I will say this, just if you are interested in drawing comics, and you do want to draw comics, one of the things that I've learned is you want to try to vary the size of your figures from panel to panel, with exceptions, and this is the exception. So here, he's being thrown across the room, and it does vary slightly. He's obviously, we're a little further away. He's drawn him Spidey smaller to show how far the robot's thrown him and that he's getting close to hitting the wall, and then back again. All the Spideys on this page are pretty much drawn at the exact same size. There's a little variation here and a little variation here, but for the most part, they're the same size. That is okay here because we're trying to show moment to moment. Like the idea would be if you had enough of these frames, like if we, instead of 9 panels, what if Steve Ditko had drawn this sequence in 24 panels? You could put those together, film them or take pictures of them and flip like a flip book or film them, and you have a second of film. So the idea is this is supposed to be like film, what am I trying to say? Images, along the way. So that makes sense for it to be the same, but for the most part, you do want to have some variety. You want to have a far shot, a far away shot where you can see the whole figure, then maybe more of a mid to a close up, back to a far shot. Making the camera go in and out makes for a more interesting experience for the viewer. Same here. More grid, more action going around. Again, I didn't have anything particular notes from the art. Again, part of it is very simplified, and again, I wonder how much of that was Steve's running behind, Deadline is running behind. So let's really simplify. The robot is mostly shadowed out. You see one shot here of the front, the rest are all the back, which is solid. So that's very simple. He's spinning around, so it's just some lines. This is a page that can be drawn much more quickly than the one we looked at, for example, that I really like with these horizontal panels. This page would take a lot more time to draw than this page, even though potentially there's more panels. On this one, again, we're going through that motion. I like this leaping pose. This is something that Spidey, throughout the history of the comics, Spidey does a lot. You see a lot of artists use sort of this leaping pose, which is great. Could have been a little bigger, but terrific. With the arms extended, it's just a very classic Spider-Man look. And then this close-up down here is really good as well. So he's hanging onto the robot, trying to shut it down. I really like it because I like the way that Steve draws the webs turning and moving over Spider-Man's body. So it gives him a sense of form. It's not just a flat 2D circle. It's a form, and this pattern wraps around it, which is very, very nice. And like I said, we've been seeing lots of faraway shots, itty bitty figures. It's nice to have that close up to be able to see. Back to the stairs again. Great perspective. Stairs are hard to draw. Fantastic way to do it with all the stairwell stuff here. Terrific. So hard. So hard, but great. And let's see. And then I had here on this page great facial expressions again. Flashes, confusion, Peter's smile, where he's kind of turning the tables for a change and pointing at maybe Flash is Spider-Man because he wasn't around. Conveniently, all the things that people would say to Peter. So some nice stuff there. And again, even without the dialogue, I'm not reading it, but we know what's happening. You can tell from the facial expressions who's feeling what, and that's a real strength to Steve Ditko. So the technically this story ends. There's the end of that part. But there's more pages. So again, this also makes me wonder between the last issue with the Return of the Vulture, and I thought there was some inking assistance which would say, hey, maybe the artist is running a little late and he needs some help. Then you have a story here that's run a little short, so we haven't filled up the whole book. We've got to do what's called a backup, and this happens sometimes where so we need to fill in some pages to have a whole book. And so they've got a little story here about Spider-Man and Human Torch. Now, what's amazing about this, which I had forgotten about this, I've obviously read this book before. I forgot this existed. This is, of course, still written by Stan Lee, but this is a Spider-Man story drawn by Jack Kirby, but inked by Steve Ditko. And I don't think I have ever seen that before. So Unlike the Spider-Man story, so Spider-Man, in the first part of the book, where it says the credits say it's illustrated by Steve Ditko, that when it's illustrated by one person, that tells you that they did the pencils, they did the inks, they did it all together, right? Here, Jack Kirby, this means he would have drawn the pencils, so he would have drawn all the imagery, all the figures, all the pages in pencil, and then given those pages over to Steve Ditko, who would have then inked them. So this is fascinating to me. This is primarily how Jack Kirby worked. He was a penciler, and then he worked with a lot of artists over the years, primarily on his Fantastic Four run, where I think it's Joe Sinnott is probably the most famous or most notable inker that worked over Jack Kirby. But tons of people chipped in and inked over Jack Kirby over the years. But again, I'd never heard of a story where Steve Ditko was the inker. So fascinating to me. It's very Jack Kirby. If you're familiar with Jack's work, especially his Fantastic Four work, then this is going to look very recognizable because it has that aesthetic. Yeah. Oh, and what I mentioned in my notes, I actually take notes before we go on. So when you have a pencil and inker combination, so let's just take a step back. When Steve Ditko is inking himself, everything is him, meaning the lines that he puts in for the ink, he knows ahead of time as he's drawing where he wants those to go. As an artist, that's what you do. You're thinking about the final product, and there's a good chance he's drawing, minimally in pencil, and then he's going to come in and ink it himself. So there's no reason necessarily to draw every single detail with your pencil. You're going to fill it in with ink because you're the artist. When you have an inker, what can happen is you have a couple of things can happen. One is that your inker is going to use their style, their artistic abilities, their creativity, their artistic philosophy, and they're going to sort of take over. And whatever the pencils are, that's just a foundation, but it looks like the inker. Okay? And there are a few examples of that I can think of off the top of my head. I'm not going to call anybody out, but there's some inkers that are more heavy-handed, and their inks look like their inks, no matter who the other artist is. Then you have some where the inker is going to be 100% true to the lines of the penciler, and basically it looks like the penciled artist, but just solid black inks. And I think that's more of what we have here. Steve Ditko is more true to Jack Kirby's lines. When we go through this and you see the faces, you see the clothes, the shading, it looks like Jack Kirby drew this, and you wouldn't recognize some of the elements that Steve Ditko brings into his own work. So I think he was very, very true to Jack Kirby's pencils. The other option you have is that they mingle and you end up with a third thing. So there are pencilers and inkers where if you look at them separately, neither one looks like the other's artwork. So the penciler has a very stylized look. The inker, if they draw something themselves, looks different. When the two come together, they get a completely different third thing. And that's probably the most exciting and most interesting art combination, when you can find that, when you have an inker and penciler duo where the sum, what is the saying, the sum of the parts, the final product is greater than the sum of the parts, something to that effect. Well, let's get into this. So one of the things right off the bat, this is a Kirby face. So if you've seen, there's some early drawings. Kirby drew the original cover to Amazing Fantasy 15. And the eyes, he draws the Spider-Man eyes a lot smaller. He had a different aesthetic for Spider-Man. He's a little thicker in terms of his muscularity, the body shape, whereas Steve drew him as a much more thin, wiry, bendy figure. So Jack drawing him, like I said, a little thicker. The neck is thick. The arm, you can see the muscles in the arms and stuff. And then the small eyes. So that's kind of interesting. Down here, I mean, these faces are super Jack Kirby. So one of the things that I talk about all the time in these videos is how impressed I am with Steve Ditko and how he draws his figures very differently. His faces, all the characters have a different face. Jack tended to sort of default to very similar faces. So like, this girl's face, this girl's face, and this girl's face is basically the same with some different hair on top. There's not a lot of variety to how he drew those faces. Same, this face here could be, Johnny Storm with different color hair. That's just how Jack did it, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just it's expediency. It's a lot faster to just sort of draw a generic face and then color the hair a little different or put it in different clothes or whatever, and now you have a different character. So there's something to that, and it's just a style and it's just a choice, but it's definitely very different than what we've been looking at with the Steve Ditko version of the comic. So here again, we go back to the grid as the two heroes begin to fight, as Spidey, for whatever reason, has just decided he's going to give the Human Torch a hard time for some reason. He just, again, the motivation is a little questionable, I guess. So they begin to fight, and you notice how small these panels are. So Jack really did like the 9-panel grid. He would use that quite a bit, which leads to very small figures. But that being said, I loved this figure down in the bottom panel. The reason I say that is terrific body language, and you feel the weight. So Spidey's used his webbing to scoop up a bunch of sand, and he's going to fling that sand at the Human Torch to snuff him out, the way you would a campfire, right? So the crossing of these arms and how far it is, right? Like you can't bend your arm across your body any further than what Spidey has done. The width of his feet and how they are planted, and then even though it's super small and you can't see the details, the way that the circle of the head overlaps the shoulders, you don't see the neck. That's foreshortening that we talked about, and that tells you that his head is leaning back, so it's covering part of the shoulder and the neck, and you can't see it. And that tells you right there how it gives this a lean. So the body is leaning back, crossing his arms across himself. There's great power, body language, and motion and weight to a teeny tiny little figure. That is the genius of Jack Kirby. That is the thing that he brought to comics that so many other people didn't and still don't to this day. And that's why going back and looking at these is an amazing way to learn the history of this. We can take forward and learn these lessons from Jack and Steve Ditko and what we can be doing with our comics today with just the simplest of form, the tiniest little figure. You can show tons of energy. All right, so we have some more stuff here. I like this Torch figure here. So the Torch is throwing fire buzzsaws at Spidey, but the way, again, this weight, the way that this arm is coming across and is counterposed with this leg really gives you that sense of motion across. This leg jutting forward, to me, I was like, this could be Captain America. This is a straight out Captain America pose, throwing that shield, which, is Jack Kirby was famous for. If there's one thing Jack did, it was draw a powerful Captain America throwing stuff. And he's used that same technique for the Torch to draw, to the Torch to be throwing stuff at Spidey. Fantastic, amazing. Again, would have loved to have seen it bigger, but it is what it is. And then just, again, nothing too crazy here. So he gets away from the Torch, and now the rest of the Fantastic Four are there and kind of like, hey, buddy, you want to give up, but Spidey's stubborn, and so now he's going to fight the rest of the team very briefly as well. The Thing, so, Jack Kirby, I think, if anybody is familiar with the history and the stuff with the Thing, the Thing was probably his favorite character. I believe the Thing was modeled after himself. And I do like Steve Ditko, the inking here. It feels rough. It feels like he's made of a pile of rocks without it being... a lot of people draw the outside shape of the Thing and then just draw lines inside. But this feels like he's made of lumps. And I appreciate that. Not every inker that draws the Thing is able to pull that off successfully. But I like that here. And then we'll go, and then here's the last page. And Spidey gets away from the Thing, but he ends up getting caught up by the Invisible Woman, who flirts with him. So I guess at that point, this is prior to her marrying Mr. Fantastic. So they flirt a little bit, and Spidey takes off, and there's the end of this silly little story, which makes no sense other than just to fill in the back of the book. Why you would have Spidey fighting the Fantastic Four because he wanted to tease Johnny, who knows? But just an awesome, cool little piece of history to say, hey, we've got Steve Ditko inking Jack Kirby. I don't know where else that happened. Maybe it happened in other issues. Maybe we'll see more of that as we go through this series, but it's something I had not remembered. And then there's the end of the issue. So there we have it. We have The Amazing Spider-Man number 8, featuring a crazy robot with a lot of itty-bitty little panels. A weird story of Spider-Man picking on the Human Torch, but drawn by Jack Kirby, the King, and inked by Steve Ditko. Really, interesting, a different kind of issue. We're moving ahead. The next issue we're back to the format of another new villain. So that's always exciting to see one of Spidey's very classic rogues galleries and their origin story and his first interaction with them. So that'll be in issue number 9 that we'll look at next time. So thank you for your time. I hope you've enjoyed this look back at the art of The Amazing Spider-Man number 8. Appreciate all of your support. Thank you so much. Please, if you have the opportunity, leave a comment, like the video if I did a good job. Tell me what you think. I do check for all of your comments, which are greatly appreciated. And of course, subscribe to the channel. My goal is to continue to put out these videos every Monday. So if you like them, we'll give you something to look forward to on Monday morning. So thanks so much, and I'll see you all again here soon for the next Amazing Spider-Man art retrospective video. Thanks so much.